Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the engine rebuild and the engine assembly. On the last episode, we put the pistons in, we degreed the cam, we put the crankshaft in, we put the timing gears on. Now it's time to start putting together the rest of the timing cover, the head, and maybe even put the gearbox on today. We'll see how much I get done. I don't want this episode to be a huge, crazy long episode, but I want to go into detail for you guys. Before we get started, I want to talk to you guys about 3 things. First off, don't forget there is a t-shirt design contest going on, as well as an intro design contest going on. So if you guys are interested in submitting your designs or your video intros, check out the links in the description below. It was supposed to only go for like 2 weeks, but I didn't get quite enough submissions. So I'm hoping that we can get this going and get a few more submissions so that you guys have some choices to pick from. And then the people who win are going to get $75 gift cards to 7 Mini Parts if you're in North America. If you're not, then you get a $75 gift card to the part supplier of your choice. So check out those links that have all of the instructions in them for submission, all that stuff. Second thing, third thing, I don't remember if that was the first or the second. Doesn't really matter. So the other thing is that I'd love to do another subscriber showcase video. That basically is another full episode where I share cars that you guys have submitted, the people who watch this channel, and share the really awesome different minis there are out there. So if you're interested in getting in and submitting your car for that, head to the link in the description. That will give you information on how to submit and the things that I'm hoping to be included with that, because videos are really cool. I love pictures, but this is YouTube and I love sharing videos of other people's cars. So head to those links, submit, share, do whatever you want to do. But let's get into doing more work on this engine and getting it back together. All right, so next up, all we're gonna do is put the timing cover on. But before we do that, as you can see, there's some kind of gasket material here already. I did actually put the gasket on here, but for whatever reason it tore. I must have like pulled on it too much or something and it tore. So it didn't keep a seal, and there's no way I'm gonna be putting a timing cover on here that might not be sealing properly. So in order to put your timing cover on, all you need to do is, well, you need to put your washer on that goes on your cam gear. That has a notch in it where it sits on the keyway itself with the side that says F towards the front of the timing cover. And then you put your gasket on here, tighten it down, just like any other mating surface, bolt all this stuff together. And one thing that you want to take extra care of is these 2 bolts right down here at the bottom. So you can see this is the crankshaft side. These 2 bolts need to be as flush as you can possibly make them on the other side, on the back side of this. Otherwise, they're going to bottom out on the gearbox and cause kind of interference issues. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, simply just bolting this stuff on. So let's get to it. All right, so now that we have this cover back on, as you can see, I've returned the nut to the pulley, which needed to go onto that timing cover. And keep in mind, this timing cover needed to have a rubber gasket around the opening of this pulley. Now, granted, I've already put that on. I forgot to show you guys that, but just keep in mind that you have to have that in order for this to seal properly. The next thing that we have to do is tighten this bolt down. Now, I have found there are 2 different ways to tighten this down to spec. The first being, you can tighten this down while holding the crankshaft, you know, from moving using like some sort of wood thing. You know, 2x4 works. I sometimes use my rubber mallet, that works. And this needs to get brought down to 70 to 80 foot-pounds of torque. And then you need to bend up the tabs on this washer down in here, which can be a little difficult, but it is doable. So what I'm gonna try is using the wood method, try and keep this from spinning. If that doesn't work, then what I can do is later on, I can wedge something on the other side once I get the flywheel on and that nut on, and then torque these down while holding the other side. So let's see what I can do here. All right, there we have it. And I don't know why, but I just went ahead and put up 3 tabs, 1 on each side. Don't think that's really necessary. I just went ahead and did it anyways though. So the next thing that we're gonna do is take the water pump, put that back on here, And this is going to require a gasket. You got to put a gasket in here. So I'm going to do that, put the gasket on, and set the water pump down on here. Now, this is my water pump. This is a really good time to check to make sure that this is spinning freely. If it's binding or it's like super loose, you're going to want to replace this. It's simple. It's quite easy to replace. And if you've got the motor like this, it's kind of a no-brainer. Just go ahead and do it. All right, so now the water pump is on. That's looking good. The timing cover, everything else is looking really nice and tidy. As you can see, if you've got a keen eye, this is not something that's original to the car. This is part of something I'm doing. It's an AN conversion on this whole breather system. And I've got a really cool PCV valve that is AN compatible. So I'll be able to run my 2 breather lines into an oil catch. That oil catch will breathe and come back to the intake with this PCV valve to help prevent any sort of oil from being ingested into the motor. Pretty cool stuff. I'll show you guys that in more detail later, of course. But for right now, we can rotate the motor over, and I think it's probably a good time to start doing the cylinder head. So let's do that. All right, so next up, we're going to be doing the cylinder head. And so the way that this motor is mounted on this engine stand is this is the front of the motor here, and this is the engine stand. Then on the back side, obviously, back of the motor. So got my water pump on. The next thing that we're going to do is clean the surface where the head gasket is going to go. One of the most important things that you need to do before putting your head gasket on is removing all of the oil, grime, anything that is on the surface of your block right here or the surface of your head. So I'm going to do that off screen for the head. It's pretty straightforward. Usually I spray some brake cleaner on a rag or a paper towel, and then I really clean this down. I have heard other people use things like automatic transmission fluid on a rag, obviously, and then you wipe that off. I don't really know. I've never done that before, but I have always wanted to try it. Just don't have any ATF here with me. So we'll be sticking with brake cleaner on a rag, get all this oil and grime off of here. Now this head gasket that I've got here is from 7 Mini Parts, naturally, and this is a really, really high quality gasket. This thing has never failed me so far, knock on engine block that it doesn't for this build as well. But when you're doing this, when you are looking at this head gasket, it actually reads top on the head gasket. Now you should be able to see it right there. It says top, and that is how you know which direction the head gasket actually needs to face. Now, once you have figured out which side is the top, the holes should all line up pretty easily. I mean, pretty straightforward from there. So now, obviously, if we try and put our head on without putting the posts on yet, it's just gonna slide around. Nothing's gonna hold that in place. So we're gonna set this off to the side, and we're gonna put our head studs on. Now, the head studs that I use on every single one of my builds are ARP head studs. They are incredibly strong. They are what I recommend for anyone who is rebuilding an engine and putting the head on. Even if you're just doing a head gasket, I would recommend just using these ones. Now, these head studs have one side of coarse thread and one side of fine thread. The coarse thread goes into the block, the fine thread sticks out, and that's what the actual nuts sit on. And on the ARP head studs, you have an Allen key on the end of your bolt so that you can tighten these down into the block. Sometimes these head studs have a specific order that they need to go in. Sometimes they have a specific orientation. As far as the Mini goes, they have a specific spot that, that the longer studs go and the shorter studs go. So in my case, and in most folks' engines, you'll have the long studs on the back with the shorter studs on the front. The ones that are shorter are the ones that you can actually see from the front of the motor once it's all put back together. And then the ones on the back sit inside the valve cover ultimately and are covered up. Now, my instructions for these head studs is that they have to go in hand tight, the studs themselves, and then you torque the nuts down. This is going to be pretty common. It's pretty much the way it goes with any head studs that you'd get for replacement. The key is that you just follow the spec of whatever you're given. Don't take what I'm saying as word of law because it may not be the right rules for your specific head studs and your specific application. Now when you're putting that head gasket on, you're going to want to take extra care not to bend it too much, not to get it caught. You want this all to kind of go down equally and at the same time on that. And then we're going to take our head with our spark plugs facing forward, and we're going to set this down right on these studs. Line everything up if you can. And there we have it. Done. Engine's ready to roll. I'm just kidding. You got to torque these suckers down now, and in order to torque this down, you need the rocker assembly. And in order to put the rocker assembly on, you need the push rods in the back of your motor here. Now, if you were paying attention and you saw the episode while I was taking this apart, I took my push rods and I put them in order in a piece of cardboard. This is going to ensure that they go back into the slot that they originally started in. Now, keep in mind that the number 1 cylinder is on this side, the side with your thermostat housing, your water pump, and your timing gear. And then your push rod simply just drops down into the holes with your lifters. And there you have it. You got your push rods in. Now you can put your lifter assembly on, your rocker assembly. And if you're super hip and cool, you might have like a roller tipped rocker system. I'm going stock. I've already got a performance cam, and if I want to add a rocker assembly later, it's super easy and I can do that with it in the car. But for right now, stock's going back on. And in order to do this, you simply slide it down over the head studs and the studs that are on your head. Now keep in mind, those studs that are on the head itself, since I am reusing my rocker assembly and everything, I never took those out. But if I wasn't reusing these studs, I would have had to take those out and I'd be replacing them. They go in the same way that your head studs do, but they don't actually do any of the work of holding your head in place or anything like that. Now, it's at this point, I generally like to put the nuts on that go on the non-main head studs on the cylinder head here. And I like to go ahead and put those on just so that it kind of holds the rocker assembly in place. That way it's not going anywhere and it's not, bouncing out of place or anything. So I'm gonna slide these down on here. All right, so there's one thing that I forgot to show you guys, and let me pull this back a little bit so you can see it. Some engines, some heads specifically, have a bypass valve. And the bypass allows fluid, from my understanding, to pass by the thermostat and then back down into the water pump and get recirculated. And that bypass is at the bottom of your head here, and then it goes into the top of your water pump. Now, if you're like me and you put the head on without putting that hose back in there and clamping that down, you can take the water pump back off and then put that hose in there, which is what I did. But you can also do that when you're putting the head on, which is the ideal situation. You put a small piece of silicone hose. I strongly recommend silicone, not something like just regular rubber. This hose is not something that's really easy to service while it's in the car unless you take the head off. So just keep that in mind. But anyways, I took the water pump off, put that valve back on there. I also added my sweet new silicone hose to the actual return for the radiator. That goes down to the bottom, and I'll show you guys that more once I start putting that back together. Now at this stage, I can keep putting stuff on the top of the head here. There's the heater takeoff, which comes off right here, goes on. That looks really good with the new blue, as well as the thermostat housing. I am going to wait on the thermostat housing until I can put the radiator and everything on, because I do drop the motor in with the radiator. It's just a little bit easier on my Mark I. But at this point, let's go ahead and jump over to the gearbox and we'll start looking at that and kind of shimming that up and making sure it's in good shape. All right, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is checking the clearance on this idler gear here. And it's a pretty easy process, but you can't do it when the motor is actually on the gearbox here, because you need to be able to put the front cover on, but you need to be able to access it from this direction here. Now, the clearance, what we're checking is the amount of space between this gear with the float washers on, in between the float washer on the inside and the gearbox case. Now, it's pretty easy to check, and it's quite important if you want your motor to be nice and as quiet as possible and running the way it should. So, first thing that we're going to have to do is get our gasket. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of gaskets, different specs and different thicknesses. In my experience, the easiest thing to do is to just pick up one of these gaskets from 7 Mini Parts and then set that on there. And then we're going to take the cover and bolt it up on here. Now, when we do this, we are going to take our feeler gauge, and I'll show you guys on the other side how we're going to measure this. Okay, so the next part is actually checking the infloat in between your washer here and the body of your transmission. Now, you're going to want under 6 thou of infloat here. And as I'm checking it here, the 6 thou is not going in, which is good. Now we're down to 4. Also not able to, oh, just barely able to get that down in there. Get nice and tight in there. So, I am within spec. I'm not too worried about this. This is looking good. Bolts are tightened down, and now we can go ahead and drop the motor on the gearbox if we're ready to do that. Okay, so there's only a few things left before we can mate this with the gearbox, and I think that's what I'm gonna wrap up this episode with, putting this top of the block onto the gearbox. Now, at this point, it's pretty much the last chance for you to check the torque on all of these things. So before I put this down on the block with its new gasket and everything, what I want to do is double check the torque on everything here. So I'm going to start with the connecting rods, which need to be at 40 foot-pounds. All right, so now I've confirmed all of that stuff is torqued down the way it needs to be torqued, and that's in good shape. So the last thing I'm gonna do is install the gaskets that are gonna be going on here. I'm probably actually gonna put those on the gearbox before it gets set down on there, but there is one right here that we are gonna have to put in before it goes on the gearbox in a specific orientation. So I'm gonna flip this over, attach it to my lift behind me, and then I will put the gasket on there and show you guys what I'm talking about. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up this episode of the motor assembly. It's pretty much done. The only thing I have to do is put the clutch like housing on, but I ended up tearing my rear main seal while I was putting that on, so that's gonna have to wait. I'll get into that on the next episode, but I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It is really hot here in Charlotte, so I'm glad that this is done and I can kind of take a break for a little bit. But if you have any questions, as usual, put them in the comment section below. And don't forget the 3 submission links for the t-shirt design contest, the intro design contest, and the subscriber showcase. So if you guys send me your videos, send me your pictures of your classic Mini, give me some information, I will share it on my next subscriber showcase video, which should be the next or the following episode. So until next time, enjoy those Minis and motor on.